In the latest Economic Freedom of the World report, South Africa has been overtaken by 15 former communist countries as well as 7 other African nations. That index measures the levels of economic freedom, including the ability to enter markets, security of privately owned property, and the rule of law. The Freemarket Foundation, which released this report this week, has now urged government to relax its labor policies in order to boost economic activity. Freemarket Foundation Deputy Director Hattingh joins us now via our video link for more on this report. And Chris, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us here on the AM report. I wonder if we can just begin with what to make of where South Africa is in the world rankings. Is this telling us that South Africa's levels of economic freedom have dropped, or that other nations have increased at a more accelerated rate?
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to the viewers. Thank you very much for having me on this morning. I think you raise a very pertinent point. These numbers should be taken in a broader context. I think both things can be true, and they are true. In the year 2000, South Africa was ranked 58th on the Economic Freedom of the World Index, so we've obviously declined since then. And we see that in the reality on the ground for many South Africans. For example, 75% unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate, over 40% unemployment rate on the expanded definition. So people find it very difficult to get jobs at the moment because we don't have a growing, inclusive economy that makes it easy for businesses to grow and for job opportunities to be created. On the other side, other countries have taken steps to improve their scores. As I often like to point out, no country is perfect, and no sort of ideas are going to offer you complete utopia and all the solutions. But on average, those countries which implement more economic freedom have better quality of life, longer quality of life, better literacy rates, all that kind of thing. So on a spectrum, if one implements more pro-economic freedom policies, on average, citizens' lives are better.
Yeah, perhaps I got a bit ahead of myself here. South Africa is very fluent in explaining things like political freedom, and that's because of our history. But how would you describe what economic freedom actually is, and more importantly, why ordinary South Africans should care about it?
So if we take it, for example, from a theoretical point to a policy point, the theory or the ideology that one has informs the policies that you implement. So, for example, if you think government should be more intimately involved in people's lives, then you'll want to implement policies that are more intimately involved. Maybe you'll want a strong welfare system. Maybe you'll want nationalized universal health care. Maybe you'll want to nationalize land. To have something like a strong welfare system, first you need a growing economy. So before we can redistribute any wealth, before we can have strong welfare grants, before we can have more cheaper healthcare services in the public sector, we need a growing economy. So to get there first, you need to implement the policies that ensure the economy is growing. The ideas and the ideology we have impact people on the ground. So just on the EFW, it measures data across 5 areas, and those 5 areas are size of government, legal system and property rights, access to sound money, freedom to trade internationally, and regulation of credit, labor, and business. So if the viewers are interested, if they go and look at the EFW, it breaks down South Africa's score in those different areas, and that is how the EFW tries to define economic freedom in general, and a sort of abstract way of looking at it. It is the ease with which people can do business, can trade with each other, can find work, can find employment. The more sort of barriers there are, the more bureaucracy, the longer it takes to start a business or to get a job for you, if jobs are available in the first place, the less economic freedom on average a country has.
Fascinating. What's interesting to also note about this report is that I think it's about 15 former communist nations and 7 other African countries have overtaken South Africa. What do we read into that, especially in the context of this ancient debate about whether a capitalist society is better than a communist one?
Right, and we can use that terminology. I think all of us on different ends of the spectrum get caught up in using these labels and terms, but it would be more useful maybe in the South African context, given our high unemployment, to just think, what policies can we implement that are going to make South Africans' lives better on average? Again, not solving every problem under the sun, but just making it better over the long run. And to do that, you need capital investment, and to get capital investment both from local and foreign sources, you just need to make it easy for those businesses to invest. And to give government credit in this regard, we've seen some good noise around structural reform, so things like energy reform, allowing self-generation up to 100 megawatts, and also news of an independent ports authority But we need to see the devil in the details in those reforms. Will they actually be implemented? Will permits be granted with the self-generation of electricity? Will private investment be allowed to operate well in the port sector? All those things will help, and those things are removing barriers to the inflow of capital. If one thinks of capital like a river, if you remove barriers in a river, the water flows easier, so we should do the same in South Africa. Just on the other African countries and the former communist countries, of course, they started from a very low base. And South Africa did very well after 1994. We were going upwards and onwards. As I mentioned, in 2000, we were ranked 58th. But over the last 20 years, we've taken the wrong decisions. At the moment, I think we keep thinking that we need to force people into more state dependence and more redistribution, instead of thinking, how do we open up the economy for growth? And as I mentioned before, we can have a strong welfare system and we can look at grants and that kind of thing. But first, you need some kind of growing economy. The government can't simply keep on borrowing and redistributing money. It needs to focus on allowing South Africans to actually try out economic freedom. I think we would all be very pleasantly surprised what South Africans can achieve when they have policies and ideas informed by more economic freedom.
Yeah, and we've heard a lot of buzzwords being thrown around, right? We've heard radical economic transformation. There's been a lot of conversations around introducing a basic income grant over the past couple of days, and I imagine all of that rhetoric is going to be ramped up as we head into the local government elections. But how do South Africans sift through that noise to try, at the very least, to ensure that our index is improved so that their own material conditions can also improve?
So we at the FMF are very much in favor of radical economic transformation in the growing positive sense. To me, it's truly radical to allow people the freedom to start businesses, to allow street traders to work unobstructed by local police services, for example, to allow businesses in the formal and informal sector to grow and to start and to employ more people. And to get that positive radical economic transformation, we need the right kinds of policies. And my advice, as it were, to myself often and to anyone sort of who wants to take the advice on board, whenever new policies and ideas are introduced, just examine how much or how little they will expand the scope of government and the reach of government, and see what the reasoning behind it is. I mean, as you mentioned, the local government elections coming up, so the rhetoric will be ramped up because politicians, regardless of party, they want to get votes. They want to sell people a vision. They want to get an idea forward of, if you vote for them, they will make things work. They will put in the right policies. Just see what will be needed behind that, because it's all well and good to promise a lot of things, but just see in the data, see what's been proven, see what's worked in other countries, see what they've tried. This isn't to say that whatever works, for example, in the former Soviet Union, in the former Eastern Bloc, would work in South Africa. But on average, if you have those policies that other countries have tried that are more pro-economic freedom, South Africans will generally have a better shot at prosperity and wealth creation in the future.
And just on that, Chris, is it better to have more government involvement or less? I mean, you did speak about bureaucracy, for instance, being a barrier to entry, but sometimes leaving it to what's the invisible arm, I think it was Adam Smith in classical economics who speak about that, leaving things to the free market to some people doesn't always result in the best outcome, especially for vulnerable participants in the economy.
No, exactly, and I think that's where I bring up the point of having some sort of welfare system, having strong civil society organizations, having some measure of government programs and that kind of thing. To fund all that and to facilitate all that, you need a growing economy, so you need to create wealth and investment in the first place, and I think you can have that. I also think it's important for government, when it decides to regulate, to just be objective, transparent, and clear in the regulations that it implements. So not to put in regulations that just favor, for example, big corporates, that make it easy for them to deal with the regulations, because, of course, bigger corporates, on average, have simply more resources, HR, compliance, that kind of thing. But small to medium enterprises and new businesses, new entrants into markets, don't have that capacity. So when government wants to propose new regulations and new ideas, it's always, of course, important to do a socio-economic impact assessment. That's what we very much advocate at the FMF, but also to just see the sort of ripple effects. There's an idea in economics of unforeseen consequences, and while the intentions behind certain policies might be very noble and altruistic and they want to help people, often the reality on the ground is those policies and regulations make it more difficult for those very same people to enter the economy and to enter the market. So one needs to be very careful to just balance one's zeal and ideas for helping people by seeing what effect your policies might actually have on the ground and ripple throughout the South African economy. Again, given the context where not everyone is a big corporate, not everyone is listed on the JSE, and not everyone has the big HR departments and compliance departments to deal with all sorts of government red tape and regulation.
Fascinating discussion, especially once again as we move away from discussions around political freedom and now enter the terrain of economic freedom. Thanks for breaking it down for us. Appreciate it. That, of course, is Chris Hattingh. He's the Deputy Director at the Freemarket Foundation. Once again, Chris, thanks very much indeed.